Hey everybody, what's up? JB here. We're back, another episode. Tell me you're joking, pun intended. As I've told you many a time at this point, if you're a listener, if you're a regular listener, I've told you this before. If you're a new listener, well, this will be new to you. Tell me you're joking is intended to be a blend of pop, politico, taboo, and all of the above. Live from St. Louis. Say that too. At the time of this recording, it's live. Coming in here today with a little St. Louis love. Manis Brothers from, they're actually from O'Fallon, Missouri, but they're Southsiders down on Cherokee. I thought bringing a little rock and roll kind of tee us up a little bit. Today's going to be fun because we're going to be talking about St. Louis. We're going to be talking about development. We're going to talk about some approaching mid-21st century words that are exciting for many, scary for most. Try to dissect what it really means and what it means to us potentially here in the Midwest, in this town surrounded by water. Hint, hint. Well, you already read your dashboard. You know what we're going to be talking about. I'm really excited about today's conversation because every now and then we're able to pull in some hammers, as we say in the world of soccer. Yes, I'm a soccer fan. And today is definitely one of those days. Joining me today, two individuals, two incredibly successful individuals that one is from the north side. By the way, Ben Goldstein, he's not from the south side. He's from the north side, now you know. And the other is from Evansville, who now claims STL as home. Both of them have been incredibly successful in their endeavors as entrepreneurs, leaders, innovators, and more. And through that lens of experience, today we're going to be talking about St. Louis. What's going on? What is from a business standpoint, what is our brand? What do we look like? What do we look like to others? What should we look like? What works? What doesn't? A lot of topic there, and then we will be leaning into data centers and AI and the noise that surrounds those areas. So without further ado, joining me, and you can't see this because this is audio only, but to my left, the North Sider, Mr. Matthew Porter. How's it going, Matthew?
It's great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you coming in. And then across the table, he's a two-timer. He's back. Was our guest over there, me and Anthony Bartlett on the B side, another fine pod. Mr. Jim Goebel, how's it going, Jim?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back in your famous studio.
Infamously famous, right? We get to continue use that again. So this kind of came about after we met, Jim, and you kind of, through that conversation with Anthony, you started talking about things that you felt strongly about or that you viewed as potential opportunity and or assets here in the region. Data centers came up. And it was a small portion of the conversation, but then as we were communicating on LinkedIn afterwards, it occurred to me, I'm like, well, this is something a lot of people care about. They don't understand it. They want to hate it or they want to love it, and I think at the end of the day, nobody really knows what it is. There are people, but they're not, they're not the one telling the stories right now. So we were communicating, and it came to me. I'm like, well, why don't we just let's do a panel? Let's discuss this. And so I reached out to a couple of people, and Ben Goldstein, who's a friend who's in the field, heavy in the field. I asked him for names, and Matthew, your name came up, and I kind of want to just open the door here to putting a pin in the map for this conversation. You guys have you have been here your whole life, Jim. You've been here for remind me again.
Total of 24 years.
24 years. The landscape. The players. You've seen successes. You've seen some failures. Can we just take a second? And I want to talk about St. Louis's brand identity as it pertains to business, because I don't want to get into Skinny John Goodman or T-Rabs or any of that. But from a business perspective, a lot of people, we talk about St. Louis really from more of always through a pop lens or a community crime lens. But we have a lot of business here. Jim, to you first. When you think of St. Louis's business landscape, how would you describe it?
You forgot parks. We've got some nice parks.
Just a few.
I think overall the business landscape appears to be healthy. I don't think I think the question becomes, how are we? I think one of the measurements that people come to mind first is, how are we doing against our peers? How are we doing versus Indianapolis, smaller market, Milwaukee, smaller market, Kansas City, smaller market. Through that lens, there's not a lot of growth to talk about, and it begs the question why, and that's a myriad conversation that you could spend many podcasts talking about.
Yeah,
we touched on a lot of those things, but the core city, and I don't know how Matthew feels, but the core city appears to be steady as she goes. There are things happening. There is innovation. There are people trying to lead the way. But there's still this kind of legacy, looking back, almost nostalgic thing about, we used to have all these corporate headquarters. We used to be an airport hub. Mm-hmm. We're not those things anymore. So, that gets tired after a while. I think, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
And I expressed on your B-side podcast before, I think that the success and the growth explosion for St. Louis is inevitable, and it's going to happen with or without us, because of the core economics, the location, mm-hmm. the waterways. We'll touch some of that.
Yeah.
The boom is coming, and are we going to manage to it? Are we going to predict it, forecast it? Or are we going to just deal with it as it comes?
So for the listener, just as a frame of reference, just a really kind of a point of order here, Matthew and Jim, this is the first time you guys have met, correct?
Correct.
I figured that out based upon the introduction. So I kind of assumed that there was probably some relationship at some point in the past, but in true St. Louis style, you guys are probably 1 degree of separation.
I knew who Matthew was. And one of his former partners actually became an executive at the company that I transacted a few years ago. So right on cue. I mean, that is St. Louis, right?
Quintessential.
Matthew, I'm gonna pose the same question to you. But what I would ask of you is to kind of maybe put a kind of a historical reference to the answer if possible. Having grown up here, and you know the players, what we do, the institutions, the names, and probably the addresses of some of these firms. When you think of St. Louis and you think of St. Louis's business community, what does that mean to you?
It's a great question, and it's something that we actually have to take into account what Jim said, because we do think back so much here as a culture and society. And we always do it in a nostalgic, everything was perfect kind of way. And we think about the airport when it was started. We think after who it's named after. I've heard conversations about people saying, in the 70s, we were in the top 5 of Fortune 500 companies in the United States, and we're not that anymore. Mm-hmm. Hell, I've heard people say that they thought the Shell building downtown was named because of the shell on the building. And when you tell them that, no, Shell was actually headquartered there at some point, they're flabbergasted by that. But we've had this history, and we built it up, and it comes from our frontier DNA. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere along the way, we stopped doing that. However, we have kept a lot of industries and businesses here. St. Louis is amazing at creating the small, the medium-sized companies and actually growing them. And a lot of them are hiding in plain sight that people don't actually realize what they do.
So I've seen data via articles and different posts on a multitude of platforms that do allude to that reality, painting St. Louis as really a privately held business mecca. Jim, I see you shaking your head. Speak to that.
Yeah, that's that's accurate in my estimation. There's a lot of businesses here that most people that live in the community do not know about or not aware of. They're doing some pretty cool things. Some of them have deep history, but a lot of them have sprung up in the last 30 years, and there's a good many of them, and a lot of them are growing and doing extremely well.
How do we fare, though, when it comes to kind of a combination of industry? Because a lot of times when you have a Rust Belt town, a Midwest town in particular, when you think of the jobs and you think of industry, you think of blue collar, you think of manufacturing, you think of kind of spit and dirt, so to speak, right? But in St. Louis, we do have some flagpoles that are flying a flag that is really next gen, new technology, new innovation from big ag, geospatial, some of the things going on at Cortex, et cetera. Along those lines, if you had to maybe take it a step further, take your answer a step further, Matt, what do you think is, maybe an industry that describes or represents St. Louis, or do we, and you can't say beer?
No, I would not say beer. I don't know if we actually have one specific industry. And actually, I think that's why St. Louis fares well when things are not great in the overall economy, and we still fare well when things are booming. We don't ride the same highs and lows. For me, when I look at, what are the industries, what are the businesses here, my two litmus tests are going to be organizations like the Entrepreneurs Organization, and formerly known as Young Presidents Organization, but now known as just YPO. So EO and YPO. We have two of the largest chapters in the United States for those organizations in this town. And what's surprising to people is it's well above the batting average of something of a normal town this size. And I genuinely know those numbers because as a former president of one of the YPO chapters, I saw the demographics. We are batting way above our average for YPO. And those businesses are not just the side hustle businesses. Mm-hmm. Those businesses are $15, $20 million minimum annualized revenue. They've got some markers that they have to jump over. And I see that every day. And those businesses in both EO and YPO are spread amongst all the industries. And sometimes we have booms of constructions, and sometimes we have boom of tech, and sometimes we have boom of financials. But at a macro level, going after 10 years, it's across the entire swath of every industry.
Would you guys agree that an answer like that, which I completely agree with you, by the way, is really kind of a Financial Times, a Bloomberg-esque style of an answer? Because you're talking about organizations that the average Joe on the street has no idea exists, what they do. And most of the companies that kind of flood that environment do things that are, to your point, almost like a perfectly diversified mutual fund where you can't say what sector we are. Now, comparing and contrasting to other cities that have more of a brand identity when it comes to industry, i.e., you think of Chicago, you think of marketing and finance. You think of New York, you think of Wall Street. You think of Charlotte, you think of healthcare or banking, right? There are clear brand identities when it comes to industry related to these cities. Do you think the fact that we are good at a lot of things might potentially have hindered our growth? And I'm going to stop the question there. Question mark. Has it slowed us down because nobody really knows exactly who we are?
I think that we've had an identity crisis since Anheuser-Busch sold, at 10,000 feet, because we were known for the beer industry, and now it is a mix. I would add to what Matthew just said in that, because it's an important point, we do chug along, when other markets are hit harder than we are by macroeconomics, we just kind of keep going. And then, but then we don't expand and boom when those times come either. We just kind of do well. I would also add to what I was not in YPO or EO. I'm in Vistage. Vistage is the largest CEO organization in the world, at least in the Western world, and they have a flourishing community here. In fact, they're expanding. They're adding another executive group right now, and so everything Matthew said is accurate. And people, again, not to repeat myself, but people don't know about these businesses, and they are in all the disciplines. They're in all the categories.
So let me then let's take this industry, the froth of what we're describing here. Let's scoot that off. And when we think about the juice that is within that is the employees, that is the people, that is also the product. Same question, just a different layer of this analysis. How would you describe, that juicy middle that is, the people and the products that come out of St. Louis? What is that right now from a brand perspective, from a business perspective in your mind?
So my description of it is phenomenal, period. And it's phenomenal in so many ways. We have smart, educated folks across the gamut. It does not matter if you are working in construction and you are on the job site. When I was at Clayco as their chief innovation officer, I saw some dedicated, smart, intelligent people working those sites, building stuff that was going to last longer than any tech I would ever build. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about it from the folks that have gone to college, the tech folks, the finance folks, all the way up through it. And here's the thing that I think makes St. Louis so unique. And it was really brought to my attention by one of my clients, one of my customers. He said, "You're in the Midwest. You guys are so smart. You're so knowledgeable, and you're not assholes about it."
Maybe we should be.
Maybe.
I mean, when you have a customer service department that's doing tech work, that I'm okay with it.
I wouldn't be the one to run that department. Don't worry about it.
And the funniest part about it is one of the things he also said is, I hear just enough of my accent that I can identify with you, but it's not like you're right in my backyard. It was just enough. So it brought some sense of comfort and connection. And believe it or not, I think that's actually a hidden secret of the Midwest. And it's a hidden secret of our accent.
I know exactly what you're talking about because I lived in Chicago for almost 8 years. And I was down in the South Loop. I was in finance and running around. And, and all of our sister offices were on Wall Street. So we were constantly, that was our, quote, people. But we were Midwestern. You knew it. You felt it. You had it when you're going to buy the beer. You knew first person to offer to pay, that guy's from the Midwest.
Yep.
Right? You know that. So I think there is a lot of value there. We just haven't figured out how to package it. How do you package it? I see, you're listening to this response and I see some enthusiasm coming out of you yeah. How would you, if you just had kind of the branding / marketing wand keys for the day, what do you do?
That's a good question. There's a lot of things that if you could bottle it or make it in pill form, it would make you a lot of money. There's something to, and I spend some of my time now at an investment bank, and I talk to companies on both coasts, and I would concur with what you're saying. There's a comfort level. People, in a general sense, like the idea of dealing with someone from this region because there's this implication that we're fair dealing, that we're straight, that we're not trying to pull one over. And that is cultural, and it's to our advantage. You're asking the question, how do we harness that in a more specific way? I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak on that.
There's an oddity
That's a
there.
good
There
question.
is an oddity there.
It's unique.
Because at one side, it is, hey, these are very kind, compassionate, humble, smart people, and then let's go be braggadocious and tell how kind, compassionate, smart, and humble we are.
Yeah.
But so how do we true that up, though, with a kind of a general demeanor or an expectation within, I'm going to say corporate America, but really global economies, and that most people tend to lean in the direction of wanting somebody tough. They want a hard brand. They want a fighter. They want this persona, kind of that those that are relying upon either the paycheck as an employee or the dividend as a shareholder, they want somebody that is going to fight for them. But what you guys are describing, and I do agree because I see it too, we do have this a little bit of aw shucks in us from a brand perspective. Yet, we talked about it earlier. We are a mecca for privately held companies. We haven't even dipped our toe in the water of the wealth that is accumulated here, that exists, that is in the trust economy, that is frankly just in the backyard, right? Do you think it's okay for us to quietly tell our story as we move forward, as global economies are shifting fast, as the technology is moving even faster? Do you think it's time, in regards to the whole legacy aspect that we all brought up earlier, do you think we need to shake the legacy a little bit and maybe lean into be it a figurehead, or maybe it's even a motto, something that is a little bit tougher than what we have been up to this point?
Well, because we're kind, that doesn't mean we're weak. Those are not synonyms.
Sure.
I've seen some of the strongest people with the most resilience and grit who are still extremely kind.
Have you ever met Maxine Clark?
I have met
Yeah,
Maxine
a little
Clark.
right uppercut there, right?
Yep, very much. I mean, to me, if we start pretending to be something that we're not, that is where we're going to actually get in trouble, because we're just not going to be that. We should embrace who we actually are. Let's not try to be somebody else. Every other somebody else is taken. Let's just be who we are. Mm-hmm. Do I think we can improve? Absolutely, we can improve. I think we should be as conservative as we are when it comes to once a company has been financed, but maybe we're a little bit less conservative in the financing of it.
Jim, let me ask you real quick. Do you think potentially, because we know we have a really successful, really smart, really motivated bench of locals that have done it now for 150 plus years, mm-hmm. do you think that maybe that confidence in getting to this point, do you think maybe that has limited our ability and willingness to look at outsiders as potential assets, as opposed to ingredients that are not ours?
Yeah, that's a little esoteric. That's a tough one. Again, and we talked about this on the past podcast as well, as someone who did come from, no one can ask me where I went to high school, because
you just say I did.
That's right, I did. I have a degree. I feel like I did just fine in this community, and it is parochial, and it is familial. And I remember a famous quote from your friend Anthony that one of his clients said. St. Louis is the friendliest town I've ever been, where no one wants to be my friend. And there's a certain wisdom in that, and it's both good and bad. But overall, and I agree with what Matthew just said. Don't underestimate any of the business owners here. I mean, they can be as Machiavellian as anyone in getting things done. And some of the private businesses here are so not just impressive by their size, but they're so unlikely. If you know the Enterprise Rent-A-Car story back to its roots, the odds of that happening from the wellspring here were 1,000,000 to 1 against. Graybar is another private company that has taken over a space. It's a very commoditized space. It's a space that's hard to make money in, and they own the market. And again, came from St. Louis roots. So, I think what Matthew just said, if I could interpret it, is, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We're not jerks, but we are very smart and very capable, competent business people.
So let me ask you guys a question, and I'm going to use just a singular city, that being Detroit, as a compare and contrast opportunity here. Earlier in the conversation, we were talking, and you pointed out that even in down markets, St. Louis tends to do okay, if not good or above average. But in really hot markets, we still do okay to good, maybe above average, right? We tend to just ride that Mendoza line of we're good, right? Detroit, on the other hand, it was so beholden to a singular industry, to a singular narrative. It had to shed all of that in order to have its rebirth, and it's having it. I was there not too long ago. I grew up going there as a little kid in the late 80s. It's not the same, right? There are good things happening there. Here in St. Louis, though, do you think that because we are almost so insulated from significant downturns, is that actually like a little bit of an Achilles heel in so much that historically we're not trained to have to fight or flight because we've never really been afraid of, quote, dying when it comes to industry?
Yes. I also think it's because of that, we're not actually looking at the other cities the way that we probably should.
That's where I was going.
Because we tend to look at ourselves. This is going to go back to this conversation that happens every few years, and that is the city county. 90 plus mayors roaming around this city. I mean, we compete with ourselves. That is actually my biggest challenge for the area in St. Louis. I don't want to compete between Creve Coeur and Ladue. I don't want to compete between St. Charles and St. Louis. And I'm not saying St. Charles and St. Louis should unify, but I don't want to compete with each other. Mm-hmm. There's a bigger world out there, but because we do okay and we do okay, we can keep doing okay amongst ourselves. And that's a problem. That is actually genuinely a problem in my heart.
You see it the same way? Similarly?
Yeah, good is the enemy of great. And, the city-county divide, which invariably pops up in these conversations, right? It's deeper than governmental. It's cultural. People self-identify as, county folks or city folks. And frankly, it's absurd. I mean, we've got to get past this because you mentioned other cities and other municipalities. I mean, we don't have to solve all this in a vacuum. The blueprint's out there. It's been done. And so we just have to get out of our own way. And there's reasons why we haven't done that.
So earlier I kind of alluded to some of the next-gen industries that we see here now that are taking up kind of business journal front page space, such as ag, science ag. Geospatial was obviously the big news with the move and the big development here just north of here. Cortex has been kind of grinding along, trying to gain footing competitively in that true IT startup tech market. And there's winning stories that have come out of there. How would you guys grade kind of the current landscape of moving into those industries with intent, with a strategy to where we can, expand it and not be reliant upon a lot of this kind of expansive, balanced fun that we have now? What would be something that you would look at and say, hey, and you can't be data centers or AI because we're going to talk about that in the second half. But just how do we bottle that up and make it more? And that's another esoteric question there for you.
It is. I mean, therein lies the challenge. I mean, and again, back to the city, county, and until we start thinking as a region, mm-hmm. It's going to be very difficult to do what you're inferring. It's going to be very, very hard to do because Webster does compete with Chesterfield, and Chesterfield does compete with Maryland Heights, and we don't think and act as a region. We've got to figure out how to circumvent these fiefdoms.
I only wholeheartedly concur.
That's you have PR training, don't you? So just a little bit. All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a quick break, and as promised, when we come back, we're gonna shift it up. We're gonna talk specifically about St. Louis County, this circle, our infrastructure, data centers. What are they? How do we view them? The potential of AI as it relates to not only the data centers, but our industries here that we were just talking about. We didn't even really hyper-focus or even mention financial services firms that we have here, and what that could mean. So when we come back, more of what is to come right around the corner. See you in a second. All right, everybody, we're back. As I mentioned just a second ago, we are going to shift it up a little bit, get a little bit more focused now that we've solved those huge macro, not problems, maybe problems, issues of the area. Give it a solid. Actually, let me ask you guys. Grade St. Louis, business, community, industry, just shits and giggles, just like the health department. Grade in the window, a la Mr. Bartlett. Put a grade in the window for St. Louis's industry, business community. What is today? March 3rd, 2026. Psht, what do you got, Jim?
A minus.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to say B plus, and it is because of how supportive the community is here for other entrepreneurs, other business owners, as reflected by the EO, YPO, and Vistage numbers.
Okay. I'm surprised. I was expecting solid B's, B minuses with plenty of room to grow, but based on those grades, we're kind of up the mountain. I'm going to talk about, the hot topic of the day, data centers, AI. Jim, I'm going to start with you because you're the one that inspired me to kind of try to put this conversation together. I'm going to give you just a minute here. State of the Union, your own kind of like generic interpretation of data center, today's marketplace, and maybe a little bit of St. Louis interspersed in there. Where are you with this topic?
Well, first off, I'd like to make a distinction. Matthew is a data center expert, and I am not. I did work in the cloud space. I understand how the tech works, but he'll be able to speak a lot more intelligently to this
Sure.
part of the topic. But there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot of technophobia that people have around this topic. Some of that's well-founded. Some of it's emotional. There's an element of governance that has to be considered. From a regulatory and compliance standpoint, we've got to have smart, forward-thinking government partners in all of this stuff. And there's more technophobia. There's two layers to this. People are opposed to data centers because they're electricity hogs and they're going to ruin all the water and everyone's electric rates are going to go up. All the things that can be managed to by a good government partner and intelligent business owners. But I think there's a deeper question here, and not to jump the shark on the conversation, but
Sure.
People are questioning how important is AI. I think there's a lot of terror, for lack of a better word, around AI and what it means for the next 20 years. And people are asking themselves the question, is it worth it? Do we really want this at all? I think that's the undercurrent.
Yeah.
So it's about data centers. It's about the physical, all things material around that whole topic. However, underneath that immediately is this phobia around AI, and people are scared.
So let me ask you, Matthew, being the data center, can I say expert? Is that fair enough?
Sure, we'll go with it.
We'll go with it. That'll be in the show notes. When you hear Jim kind of lead in with technophobia and certain terminology regarding not data centers physically speaking, but AI as a concept, as a new technology, as a tool, in your view, how do you look at AI? Is it friendly? Is it, we're scratching the surface. It's going to be good. All tech's always been good. What's your position on AI generically at this point?
So I'm an optimist. I think that humanity just constantly wants to move forward, and this is part of it. I would also, if I felt that way, any other way except for that, there's no way I would be involved in this, because that would be me making the statement that I'm setting up my kids and future generations for pain and failure. So I wouldn't do that. So I genuinely believe it. And I'm not just saying that from an opportunistic perspective personally, I'm saying that from a humanity perspective. I'm saying that from all the challenges and problems that we have as human beings, this isn't going to solve it, but it is going to get us closer to solving many of them and present more opportunities for us.
Do you see along those lines, for example, like debates like this typically tend to lean into the boogeyman theories. And when I think of AI, if we take two arguments or potentials out of AI within their own silos, I hear people complaining about what AI is doing to kids and how they're not learning how to write and they're not learning how to, be critical thinkers or, do their homework, basically. But yet AI is also exponentially speeding up the research process when it comes to disease.
Correct.
And, why do you think it is that we have such a miserable time instead of elevating the potential of AI, we look at these kind of antiquated arguments as far as, well, kids aren't going to know how to write, Where are you on that side of things?
So I think we actually have to look at it from a humanity perspective. Mm-hmm. And humans aren't evolving at the same rate the technology is. We are still locked in many ways into the fact that we hear one thing negative and it takes 7 to 10 positive things to hit neutral, to hit net zero. Anybody in advertising and marketing knows this. They get a client that gets one piece of bad press, they're going to pump out ad after good story after good story after good story. And by the way, make a lot of money, but just to get that client's reputation back to net zero. So there's that. That is just woven into our DNA. Thousands and thousands of years ago, we hear the animal that could possibly eat us rustle on the plain in the dark. It's going to trigger that emotional response. Where we are failing is understanding what the good that is coming from that actually animal might actually be food for us. We're not talking about that enough. On your example of the kids, yes, that is one possibility. But because we're not having the conversations, we're not teaching parents and we're not teaching teachers and we're not teaching kids. How do I actually use this? So instead of having AI write the essay for them that gets a generic answer to a generic question, what if instead we taught them how to use the tool? Just like we taught people how to use calculators, just like before that we taught people how to drive cars instead of horse and buggy. And so instead, the kid writes the essay. It then puts it into AI and says, hey, this is the essay I've written. I want you to come up with counterpoints. What are the edge cases that I'm not missing, that I'm not seeing here? How could this have been improved? Can I go deeper on this? Can you verify that this is actually logically making sense? Use it to give feedback. Mm-hmm. Then that pushes that kid better. That's going to push that kid better than if they went down to the library, got out a book, and the old-fashioned way that I had to, scribbled something down, put together some thoughts, and turned it in.
Jim, do you think that we're so early in this process that what Matt is describing is kind of like maybe we're already on it, but the flywheel of fear is what I like to call it? Because the idea of a kid writing an article, putting it into AI, and the AI turning around and basically creating a lesson plan, I can hear teachers saying, "Oh, you're coming for my job," right? How do we approach new technology to where we can take that 1-to-7 ratio? How do we get it closer to like maybe 1-to-2 or even 1-to-3, right? How do you view that?
Yeah, I think Matthew hit on some really good points there. We're territorial primates, and people are triggered. There's a general aversion to all things new because it's going to disrupt the familiar. And people generally, their first reaction to new technology, regardless of the bountiful benefits that may or may not get promised and implicitly or explicitly, the first answer is no. Mm-hmm. Well, this is something different. I don't understand this. I mean, I think what do you think, Matt? 98% of people in the United States are just using AI as Google on steroids.
Correct.
Yeah, that's all they're doing, right? And then it's gone, I mean, my goodness, in the last 60 days, it's gone to another level because AI is beginning to iterate itself now, which is going to become commonplace, which just means it's rewriting itself with no human intervention.
Is that scary though? Does that scare either one of you?
No.
No,
Have you not watched Terminator?
I did. Matrix was good too.
Let me ask you guys a question. Do you just kind of a little bit of a rapid fire so that we can set the table here? I'm assuming, but do you actively use AI daily?
Yes.
Yes.
Which platform do you prefer?
Claude.
Claude,
Claude's probably best. I'm on Grok most of the time.
Grok. When you typically go to it, what are you going to it for? Is it work? Is it entertainment? Is it to learn something, to fix something? How do you use, Jim, you first, how do you use AI, practically speaking, on average?
To be clear, just because I made the comment, the 98% comment, doesn't mean I'm not part of the 98%. So I'm using it as Google on steroids too. I'm asking it for advice, projects around the house. My wife asks it for decorating ideas. She'll come up with a decorating idea and ask the AI what it thinks. And it actually gives people don't know how to prompt AI. They don't know how to ask it questions. They're still kind of typing in the Google sentence. And really, to make better use of it, the more complex your question is, the more benefit you're going to get out of it, because it can dive as deep as you want on most topics.
Well, to Jim's point, so I was talking to somebody last week, and he said, I tried using AI, and I've tried it a couple times in the past year to write descriptions for this product. And every time I do that, I end up actually having to correct it. And so my response was, did you actually go back to the AI and say, hey, here's the actual right version? Can you learn from this? Can you adapt to this? Can you figure out why the delta was between what you originally wrote and what it is now? And his response was, I never thought about it like that. You have to think about it like it's an actual junior level employee, or junior level of anything that you are trying to teach along. But
So in Claude, let me ask you, because I have not used Claude. Do you see in your own interaction with Claude, is it learning you? Is it becoming? Do you have a sense that the machine is alive, and are you seeing it in real time? And what does it look like if you are?
lots of questions in that.
Yes.
Those three questions in there. So yes, it is learning me.
Yes.
So Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, they all have their own degree of memory. That memory does get updated either intentionally by me or it does it on its own occasion. So my Claude instance knows a lot about me because I actually pointed it to my blog. So it has 25 years of blog posts to go through. And it can draw an arc of my own life and how that has evolved. I've actually asked it, okay, what are the blind spots I'm not seeing?
What were you surprised about? Like, because I mean, that's a weird way of looking at yourself from afar. I was almost like from the grave. You get to look at what your legacy is. But I mean, has it taught you anything about yourself, or maybe an aha moment after it's ingested your 25 years of blogging?
The oddest thing that it found was that it said that many of my blog posts from prior to AI launching look like they were written by AI. And I attest that to growing up and going to a Catholic grade school and having English beaten and grammar beaten into me.
Yeah.
So that was probably the most awkward part. I think it's like anything. As long as you're telling it that it can be honest, it can be relentless, which is what I did, it actually saw stuff that I didn't see. We all have these things that is oftentimes referred to as the Johari window. And the Johari window falls into 4 buckets. Things I see, nobody else sees. Things I see and everybody else sees. Things people see and I don't see. And then there's the things nobody sees. To me, AI, just like a good person who knows me, because they have so much context, was able to see a lot of the stuff that I can't see. And maybe nobody saw in many ways.
So let me ask one last question about AI. Then I want to shift into kind of the relationship with the infrastructure world. And I'll just toss this out to either of you. Do you see prompting the language of talking to AI. Do you see prompting as the next sophomore year Spanish, almost like a mandatory language class, because it's not English. It's not creative writing. It's this blend of mechanical engineering meets English meets history, meets psychology. Where do you see that going? And potentially, and this is a tough question, at what age? What age should people start to be prepared for prompt as a language?
I think the earlier the better. You're going to get a lot of pushback to that from probably the halls of education, and again, it will fall back into the category of technophobia. But it should be a discipline. Coders have a big advantage when it comes to AI, not because they know code, but because they know how to talk to AI. They know how to ask it questions, whereas Joe Blow on the street doesn't. One of the rapid advancements in AI that's happening is that's changing, right? It's becoming pure English speaking, and it will not only read and digest what you're asking, it will also read your inferences. And that's happening right now as we speak. But my fear is, we don't have enough nuclear power in this country because of Godzilla. That happened because of Godzilla. People thought that nuclear power was scary. It was going to mutate creatures on the earth, and all of the things that happened. You're seeing that with, you referenced Terminator, and I said back to you, The Matrix.
Right.
That's in the back of people's minds. And for the most part, I'm going out on the editorial limb here, that's absurd. This is just software.
Yeah.
And it's a whole other conversation about what is intelligence and what is sentience. But it's none of that today.
Yeah, I find it odd that HBO releases a new special on Chernobyl right now. That can't be a coincidence,
If I may answer on the prompting, I think we're going to look at prompting in 2 years like a kid picking up a book of Shakespeare and reading that English. It's going to seem so foreign.
You guys have been in industry for a long time, and both with your own feet in the mud, so to speak. But your circles. You've seen innovators hammer and nail successes in tech. Have you ever seen anything like what we're seeing AI do?
Late 1990s, the internet. I mean, it's going to serve as an epoch moment on technology, and it's going to serve as an epoch moment for our children. When I look at my childhood, because I'm 49 years old, and I think back on that what changed childhood more than anything else was the release of the internet, which led to the release of the phones and all that other stuff. It was the starting point. My kids in their early 20s are going to look back on their childhood compared to their children one day and say that epoch moment was this. It was the release of AI.
Jim?
Yeah, I mean, technology, if you use history as a guide, technology is overrated in the short run and underrated in the long run. The big changes to society, the big changes to culture, the big changes to, dare I say, civilization, they're coming in about 20 years. And there's lots of reasons for that, some of them technological. The culture is always behind the next big tech. In other words, it takes the culture time to catch up. The difference, I think, this time is the speed of which all of this is happening. And that breakneck pace is also adding to the technophobia. People don't, it's not just change, it's rapid change. And, people are hearing in 2030, there's going to be 30% unemployment. I don't believe that either.
Yeah, because in 98, we heard all newspapers were going to be out of business.
Correct.
Took a little while.
Yeah, and radio stations, etc. There's going to be major disruption. There's no question. Major, capital M. However, we're notoriously good at adapting, and it's going to net create more, I think, opportunity than it's going to disrupt.
What's funny is I think about because we're the same age, And I was living in Chicago at the time, post college, in finance, watching kind of the .com world manifest itself in real time. And now I fast forward to now, like what I take away from it is the investment opportunity. Because I think back to then and the whole what ifs, Apple at 7 or, take your pick, right? The stories. History has repeated itself. And here we are with another opportunity for those that kind of lean into it, pay attention. This is the epoch moment, right? Anyway, that's my soapbox for a second. Buy stock. Let's talk about kind of the brick and mortar side of this, which is really what is getting the vast majority of the headlines outside of people worried about losing their jobs. Data centers. You're the resident expert at the table here. When you pick up the paper or, scroll up and you read the news article of the day and some community, some organization, and not to be dismissive, but a Chicken Little article stating that, big bad data center is going to ruin our community, kill our kids, and, our pets are going to have cancer. When you see this, knowing what you know, where do you start? Where would you start in having the conversation with the general public as to what are data centers? What do they mean? How would you start to take the temperature down?
I would start with any time that I acknowledge how somebody feels. I've tried 4,872 times to logically explain away my wife's feelings. I've failed 4,872 times, so I don't do it anymore. Explaining away somebody's feelings just logically has never worked for me. Maybe somebody can do it. It's not me. I would acknowledge that. Then at that point, I would try to draw comparisons to stuff that people know. So, for example, we start looking at these data centers. Mm-hmm. They are distributions of knowledge and information. It is no different in many ways than the printing press was, that newspapers were 100-something years ago.
The railroads.
Perfect example, too.
Yeah.
I mean, we bring it to what somebody actually is aware of, not trying to go way over the top. We get it so simple and we explain it in a very simple manner because that means you actually know it.
So I'm going to ask a series of questions here, and pardon if I interrupt, but I'm not going to play, I am the extreme layman when it comes to this. When an average Joe or Jane drives past the average data center in a particular community, can you take a second? What is in there? Who owns that? Who might own that? What is that thing doing? And if it is a distribution center, it's not my prime boxes aren't coming out of there. What is coming out of there, and what does that look like?
Matthew should answer this, but it's disappointingly simple.
That is very true.
It's property management with special caveats.
Yeah, yes. I mean, so one of the big companies in this is a real estate investment trust. It's a publicly traded real estate investment trust. It is property. The stark differences is a lot of environmental controls because data centers are on this constant balance of power and cooling. So the more cooling you have, the more power you need to cool it. They've got an extremely large amount of computers in there, and they have an extremely large amount of fiber being brought into that building. So almost every phone call that you make on your cell phone, yes, it hits a tower, and that's what the average person sees. But that tower then, through a fiber line, communicates to a data center, which gets it plugged into the Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T network, and then they cross paths to get over to the next network. Every single Charter, Spectrum communication goes through a data center. You have Starlink, yes, it goes up to space. It comes back down to a data center. Mm-hmm. It is that network fiber amongst all that stuff. And so what you see if you walk in, besides an obscene amount of security, is you're going to see mechanical, you're going to see batteries, you're going to see water being brought in, you're also going to see water being treated and probably put back out cleaner than we took it in. That typically is the case for any data center I ran. And you're going to see a lot of computers running.
Okay,
can I make one quick point?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I forgot what it was.
It was my favorite one of the day.
Oh, I know. It just came back to me. Part of the, I keep harping on technophobia, but it's more around the illogical and emotional response to all of this. All of this data center talk, all of this whole conversation is all attributed to AI. There's lots of other stuff in data centers. Like, we need more data center expansion anyway.
Well, that's where I was
Pretend AI is not here. Data centers are everywhere. They're all over the world.
So let me interrupt you, and I'm going to ask the question directly to you, because here's how I interpret a lot of the narrative that comes out through socials, through news outlets, et cetera, that are really kind of throwing the flames up in the air. When the average person hears data center and it's going to be big warehouse all that's going to be feeding AI, most people think of this the sexy evil empires of Meta, of Twitter, et cetera, that they're the ones throwing these boxes up because they're taking all of our data and they're learning all of us, they're stealing us and bottling it into this, data center technological world. But what you just kind of alluded to is, there are things that if social media didn't exist, if none of those platforms existed, we still have a rapidly growing need for these centers. Can you differentiate
the digital economy?
Yeah, so kind of maybe do a really for me, the listener, a slow 101 on insurance company or a healthcare network or whatever. Like, how are they going to market and basically scaling and demanding these types of big boxes? Either person.
So we'll talk about the insurance company. So every single insurance company, let's say it's an auto insurance company, you go file your claim. How are most people filing their claim right now? They're grabbing their phone. They're taking a picture of their car. They're taking a picture of the accident. They may be taking a picture of the police report. That phone is not processing that data. That phone is actually just taking that picture, sending it to the cloud. So whenever we talk about the cloud, what we're talking about is somebody else's data center. That's it.
Somebody else's computer.
Somebody else's computer. Mm-hmm. So it gets sent to the insurance company. I don't care if it's Shelter Insurance, headquartered here in Columbia, Missouri, or whether it's, AAA. It doesn't matter. It's going to get sent to a data center. Those computers are going to process it. Those computers are going to input all those forms. They're going to go out and get maybe the police report. They're going to check it against it. They're going to present it to the adjuster. So that adjuster walks on site and says, Mr. Porter, I already have everything for your car. I just have to check one or two things. Let me go ahead and give you a check. Okay, I've signed it on my phone to give you a check. You're going to get a check immediately sent to you. Or would you like ACH?
Yeah.
Fill in this box here. Great. Money will be in your account tomorrow for your car. Sorry about everything. Glad everybody's okay and safe.
I find like it's so funny because I think of mail, junk mail, and self-proclaimed tree huggers, right? We got to quit cutting down the trees. We waste so much paper. And here we are in an environment, and what you're describing is literally this macro, shift to a truly paperless environment. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, just from which vice am I trading for? I'm going to save trees, but now we have an issue with data centers, and we're burning more power. So I digress. Let's take a second and talk about the public's perception and the fears that are going out in opposition to expansion of data centers. Number one, and let's just start with this: power, grids, etc. Scale it for us. Maybe Matt, you start. When we look at a new data center that is for said real estate company or whatever, moving into a town of 50,000, is there a metric? Is there any kind of rule of thumb, or do we have any idea how much it's really going to use?
So you do actually know how much it's going to use. It is a complex equation for the most part, but it is a factor of how much square footage that the data center can have, how much cooling we can get on there, how much fiber we can get on there, and as well as how much battery backup that we can get on there. What I think people care about more is the cost. What is going to happen to the residential rate when that data center comes in? The challenge is that we've got this confluence point right now where we're wanting to build all these hyperscale data centers across the country, and yet we've had 30, 40 years of not investing in our overall electric grid infrastructure. Yeah. That is actually what's driven most of the rate increases.
Back to Godzilla.
Yes, it is. I mean, Jim is right. It's the nuclear power.
We stopped building, nuclear plants in the 70s.
We did, and we have all these regulations that came across it, and the whole thing about the nuclear is what drives me crazy about the conversation on nuclear is the unintended consequences of our current system. So everybody probably remembers, or at least can have some little shadow memory of the Fukushima incident that occurred.
Correct.
In Japan. The moment that Japan shut down all of their nuclear reactors, which they are now starting back up, more people have had their health impacted or died in the power generation in Japan since we shut down Fukushima and all the nuclear plants in Japan than the entire course of human history's nuclear power combined.
Wait a second. Paint that picture again. So more people died once they started shutting them down?
The generation of power, the import of gas, coal, liquid natural gas.
Okay, I see where you are.
The generation of those to be sent to Japan to have those power plants, the non-nuclear power plants, generate power, that has killed more people, have had more health consequences in that than all of the nuclear accidents in all of the entire course of human history combined. One country in a little over a decade has had more problems because of that than all nuclear power. So if the goal was to save life, it is an utter failure.
So how do you bottle that up, Jim?
Not to mention the staggering cost.
Correct.
Yeah.
That the Japanese had to absorb because they shut down their...
How do you start to bottle that up, though? And I want to bring the conversation back here to the 314. How do you start to bottle up some of those realities and work with, the civic organizations in town, City Hall, the institutional players that have a say, the gatekeepers, so to speak? How do you start to take these stats, these facts, the reality of AI is not going anywhere? State Farm is going to need more data centers, on and on and on. None of that's going to stop. Where do you start in like having a real conversation with the stakeholders in this market? Mm-hmm. Where do you start?
I think you start. Well, it depends on who you are because context is everything.
King for a day.
King for a day. You start with the community in mind. And that doesn't mean that addressing that is twofold. The real issues and the scary feelings issues, right? And one of the things you can do, and our controversial president alluded to this in the State of the Union, that these big tech data companies are going to be responsible for building their own data centers and for generating their own power. So there's a whole conversation around alternative grids. Not the assumption amongst the technophobic is that this is all going to draw a finite amount of power from the finite grid we have today. And that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Again, that's a far-reaching, winding conversation about how power generation. But you have to ensure, I think you have to start with assuring the people in the community that the rates aren't going to go up. And you can do that. It's a simple part of the. It's going to have to be table stakes for the data center companies, the tech companies, everyone that's involved in building out AI data centers. I mean, it's going to have to be table stakes. You can't raise other ratepayers' rates because you located just outside of town. I mean, that's not going to fly with anyone of any political stripes on either side of the aisle, and it's not going to fly in the community. There were $95 billion worth of projects last year in 2025 that were either halted or stopped altogether, all through community pushback. Mm-hmm. $95 billion.
So let me ask you guys.
So you've got to address this stuff. You can't act like it's not there.
So the poli-sci wonk in me is having a field day trying to dissect what you're describing, because I tend to look at the pushback, on data centers in general, because it's happening everywhere. And my brain rushes to, I don't know if you guys are familiar, Abundance, the Ezra Klein book, right? Quick summary, California's NIMBYism when it came to construction and housing and development in the name of EPA and saving trees and everything else ended up in the long run costing them housing inventory. They just don't build houses. For every 100,000 people, they build 4 houses. Texas is at 22 houses, right? Simple math. And that's clear cut. A democratic government in California and that ideology that went along with it that created the issue that California is experiencing. Data centers, though, normally when you have an issue like this, you can usually pick a team. You can say red team or blue team is going to be pro, con, and they're going to have their lobbyists, their donors, et cetera, and their regions in which and where they want it. In this particular case, a lot of the pushback that I see, and I tend to seek this out, tends to be in a lot of rural areas that do tend to lean and or vote right, and the powers that be in those areas are of Republican persuasion. And to me, it's like, it doesn't make sense. I try to figure out, okay, from a policy standpoint, who is going to champion this? Who's going to figure it out? And when it comes to data centers right now, I don't feel good about anybody actually saying, we got this, here's how it's going to work, here's how we're going to move it forward. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have city halls or state capitals and the federal government on board, you're in the cold, right? Where do you see this going, Matt, in your experience and what you see?
I'm perfectly fine at not being on one side of the aisle or the other. And I'm saying that as for the audience that doesn't know, a year and a half ago, I ran for lieutenant governor on the GOP primary ticket. So I'm saying that I'm okay with it being that way, because my fear is that if it falls onto one side of the aisle, it will get turned into a demigod. It will be just blasted by one side or the other. And that's the problem, because then it continues to be this emotional trigger, not a logical, progressive discussion on that. And I mean progressive not in the political science, but meaning the discussion continues to progress. The discussion continues to move forward. I'm good with where it sits right now. Maybe that will allow information to bubble up. That is my hope and dream. I will say, though, that the companies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the builders of it need to do a better job of engaging the community. We're not going to build in the dark anymore on this. It just impacts too many people, both negatively and positively, both real and both concerned, feared.
How do you view it, Jim? Because, again, I'm going to come full circle. Our first conversation is what really spurred the desire to have this conversation. And when you look at St. Louis in particular, because in that conversation, and maybe we bring this up now, you look at St. Louis, it was built, it has infrastructure that was built for a population of basically 1 million people, right? We are down to 270,000. The footprint's the same, same amount of streets, same amount of basic infrastructure. Now, obviously, our electrical infrastructure is probably dated just like everybody else, but some of the things that are needed for these to operate is cooling, is water, is logistics and location. We kind of check a lot of boxes. So how do you view like the potential of the next step here?
Well, I'm not current on the state of the dynamo industry and whether or not, I know Thomas Edison built a dynamo in the 1920s that could sit on a waterway and generate direct current. And he ultimately lost his company's battle because we're on AC current, not DC. But, if I can't dive deep enough to talk about the power side of it, but it seems to me And again, I look along the North River here in St. Louis, where all that industry used to be, and on all those buildings. And maybe they're all condemned. I don't know. Maybe they're not sound for retrofit. And so there's a lot of details there that I can't wax philosophic on with any great credibility. But it seems to me we've got a confluence of the two largest rivers on the continent right here, and
space.
And space. So not just current for energy production, but cooling. And I just have this, and maybe it's the faulted entrepreneur in me. There's a way to get it done. There's a way to do it. One of the criticisms of data centers in this new context is, it's not creating that many jobs. That's a valid critique, right? I mean, these aren't railroads from that standpoint. They're not, because again, it's simple stuff at the end of the day. These are big buildings. There's property management, there's electricity management, there's resource management, and it doesn't take, hundreds and hundreds of people to manage a large data center.
That argument makes me so mad, because and I hate anecdotes or puns, but 10% of a watermelon is better than 0 or 100% of a grape, or whatever the saying is, right? I totally botched it, but the fact that maybe it is 30 jobs, or whatever the job is based on the average size of a center, that's better than it being vacant. Can you take a second, Matt, and talk about kind of maybe some of the financial incentive, or how what you see when these projects are put together, when it comes to the financial incentive to a municipality or a locale, why and when it makes sense?
So the finances are there for the most part. There's a tax basis there. There's a huge basis in when you're doing the construction. It does take thousands, if not tens of thousands of folks on a site to do that. You're actually ordering more equipment. So, there's about an 18-month lag in a lot of the power infrastructure equipment if you order today. Mm-hmm. So those are generating jobs in other areas as well that are providing those jobs, that are going to continue to provide that, because data centers are kind of like organic, beings. You need to feed, water, take care of them. So stuff does break, stuff does burn out. So you're in that constant refresh cycle on that. Yes, maybe afterwards there's only 30, 40 jobs. So you're getting that employment taxes on that. You're getting that tax basis. However, we talk a lot today about the AI infrastructure, and everybody's worried, are we overbuilding? And the answer is no, because it takes a lot of compute to actually generate the models that people are used to, the GPT-5, Claude Opus 4.6. But we're going to use a lot more of that compute to actually do the inference, to do the thinking. And so those businesses, this is my whole point on why we need local hyperscale data centers, is because we've not solved the speed of light problem. We need access to compute, to thinking, to intelligence that is nearby, just like we need it for our people. And our people are going to need it from these organizations. That will continue to generate a tax basis of companies, of their productivity. We had a huge 2.5% increase in productivity in 2025. A lot of that in this country was driven because of people using AI in tandem, which created more wealth, which created more taxes. Then there's also the financial incentives that municipalities and states can put together.
Yeah.
Matt, I'm sorry, JB.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about the soft benefit? So you're a tech company, and you're looking, again, without getting too political, you're going to leave California, and you're looking at a place to put your headquarters. Are you going to put it in a data center city, or are you going to put it somewhere else? You're more likely to be here. Oh, there's excess capacity nearby.
Correct.
There's all kinds of soft benefit down the road. Mm-hmm. If we have that piece here, as I think we should, that would benefit overall.
Well, it's the Berkshire effect. There's a reason why Omaha is blown up, and it's not because Berkshire Hathaway is there, but it's because it's there.
Right.
And everybody wanted an office local or whatever. It's right. Let me ask one last question, and then we're going to start to wrap this up. I don't understand this. So if I have a data center and a municipality is, doing the dance. They're trying to figure it out, and there's tax revenue to be had based upon the tenant and what they do. In a traditional world, it's really easy to understand. If you have a 20-acre warehouse loaded with furniture versus a 20-acre warehouse loaded with Ferraris, one is going to generate more tax revenue than the other based on the value of the asset. Do data centers work the same way?
In some places, they do actually work the same way. There is a property tax that is on it. I mean, if you're in California, which I feel like we've picked on California enough on this, if you actually have an asset there, your property tax alone generates revenue.
Correct.
So there is that perspective on it. And to Jim's point and your point, to a building sitting vacant, doing nothing, there was no investment leading up to that building being renovated or even brought down and raised and a new building put up. There was nothing there. So we're doing it from a base of zero in many, many ways. So why would we not do that? While along with the soft benefits that Jim's talking about, the bringing new people to town, preservation of the companies, the organizations that we have here, not only counting the one-off entrepreneurs that we're going to see because of intelligence being nearby.
Let me ask a follow-up question. Just let's say we have a building in St. Louis near Northside, whatever, it takes up a warehouse. Is it safe to say that if negotiated properly, that you would generate more tax revenue, service tax revenue, based upon what is in there? Say AB wants it, and their data is basically beer and distribution. I'm dumbing this down. And they're competing against Wells Fargo for the same space with financial data, with more user data, et cetera. Is it safe to say that the revenue generated from the Wells Fargo option should be more than kind of the, not brick and mortar, but the beer and suds of an AB client in the same space?
It could be, and I feel like I'm harping on this, but it is so important. It could be, and it's actually going to bring ancillary services more than just a beer distribution.
Fair enough. I feel AI enlightened. You guys are my personal Claudes for the day. I appreciate that.
God help you.
I am your opus.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I think that's a good place to stop because we could go on and on and on. And I'm sure you guys have real things to do today as well. But Matthew Porter, Jim Goebel, I really appreciate both of you guys coming in. Did you enjoy yourself? I mean, let's get this on the air. Did you? And if you didn't, you can say that. I'm fine with that. Because I, too, have a wife that has told me 4,278 times that, I don't know what I'm talking about. So, all good?
Great. It was a great job. You
Awesome.
did a great job. So did Jim.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jim. As always, pleasure. We need to do this again. I'm going to pick up the phone and get other people, because as soon as this pops, people are going to be like, I have an opinion too. And I love those opinions because I think that's one thing about St. Louis, that we have a lot of ideas that percolate in the golf cart at the corner of the bar, and we rarely see them manifest in today's environment where we see an address, right? It happens, but I think we need more of them. And I think you guys might agree there too. So tell me you're joking. Thank you for listening. Like, review, follow, share. Gentlemen, until next time, we'll see you.
Cheers.
Take care.